You guys, I am Mo. I am an R25. That is frankly still how I sort of think about myself, as a perpetual learner. I do worry I'm a little bit down on the downslope. But I do think there's probably some things that us R25s can sort of help people who are in the R lower group number some of the time, even if we don't know whether the semaglutide should be restarted or not. We at least knew that we needed to stop it when the veteran came in sick with that. I am a hospitalist and a palliative medicine physician at the Boise VA. So I'm calling you from Boise at the moment. And I am the program director for the internal medicine residency through the University of Washington for the residents who are in Boise for all 3 years. So UW has the program in Seattle, the program in Boise, and in July, they'll for the first time have the program up in Soldotna, Alaska. So anytime I get to talk to you guys, I try to wear my shirt with the logo and put the logo on the slides, just so that you know there's like whammy out in the island out here. What are my qualifications to talk to you guys about running an effective meeting? Well, as an R25, I have run a lot of meetings, and I have run a lot of meetings very poorly. And I have occasionally run a meeting that was just a home run, and most of them are somewhere in between. I would like to take some time for you guys know each other already, so I think this should be an interactive event. I don't do research on how to do effective meetings. You're not going to find in PubMed all of my prowess. This is sort of school of hard knocks and reading about what others have recommended. Before we get going on what I had planned, is there something in particular that any of you had wanted to make sure that we try to cover today? Because perhaps we can make sure that when we get to that part of the talk, we can stall and make sure we give that enough time. And it's okay if you don't have anything in particular. Good. All right. Well, we'll go with what we've got. All right. Let's see. Let me see if I can make this. One of the rules is to make sure that you can get, there we go. All right, so to sort of set some of the ground rules for our discussion, I've stolen this slide from my associate program director colleague, Andrea, and we've already role modeled this in our introductions already today. But all of you is welcome here. You've all got your videos on, except for Lexi, who's told us why she can't. If you need to shut your video on and off, please do that as you see fit. Please let's agree on how we're going to ask questions. If it works for you guys and we don't have to monitor the chat and we can just unmute because there's a small number of us, does anybody think that's not going to work for them? We're okay with just unmute. You can raise your hand if you want to. Sometimes I don't see the little hand. I think just unmuting and interrupting me is probably a better way to go. I think we should try not to interrupt each other, but you can interrupt me. We'll give everybody their space. If people come up with ideas that seem different than us, let's assume positive intent and turn to wonder and try to understand the ideas. And then if one of us is talking more or less than the others, let's give some space for everybody to participate who may want to. All right, so we're going to talk about pre-work before the meeting itself, and then post-meeting work sort of in those chunks. So this is my favorite question for meetings. Hopefully it's maybe one of yours too, is do we even need to meet in the first place? So help me think through, guys. This is share with me. What sorts of things do you think lend themselves to a meeting? Or if you can't think of that, what sort of things do you think are a waste of time for a meeting and could be handled in a different way? So reasons where people should meet.
So always reminds me of that like meme of a meeting that could have just been an email. And I think, yeah, anything that requires, multiple back and forth with some degree of regularity, I think would warrant a meeting. Kind of if there's going to be questions that might arise, or if there's kind of a presentation, I think, or kind of some photos with commentary that would merit a meeting. But yeah, I think there is a good question to start with because there are many, many things that could just be handled with email and maybe even more effectively because then you have written documentation as you go.
Gotcha. Great, Luke. So I'm gonna summarize that into if it's just information that needs to be given to a group, maybe that can be done in an email or some other way rather than convening a bunch of people to just have them be talked at. But what might work well is if there is a problem or an issue where it's beneficial for us all to be in the room at the same time so that we can have active discussion and back and forth pulling on an idea without that being 2 weeks worth of 75 emails where we misunderstand each other anyway. Great. Other thoughts about where a meeting might be better than another way to communicate?
Maybe just a different way of saying it. But if a group of people working together have different opinions on a matter, it helps to harmonize uh, their opinions and to come to a consensus if they have a meeting in a short time.
I love that. Ermias, if I'm hearing you correctly, one that might be more efficient, I think you said time in there. Two, maybe easier for us still as a human race to communicate when we can see each other in some way and have facial expressions and have discourse back and forth, maybe rather than losing content or intent in a written document or some other sort of way. I love it. I'm going to add into that that sometimes, right, maybe Ermias and I are having like a discussion that we can't sort of sort out, but a meeting may allow us to bring in a content expert or somebody else into that discussion, into a meeting, so that we can get the information we need to move the discussion forward. I love it. Any other thoughts come to mind?
I was just looking over at my calendar here to think about the question. And I feel like some of these meetings are like things I schedule with the hope that by the time I get to that meeting, I will have, like, it's kind of a way to get a job done, a placeholder, like, oh yeah, we'll meet in 2 weeks. And by that time, it's like more of a placeholder, a reminder to do something than actually the goal of what we're going to do in the meeting itself. So I don't know if it's entirely good or bad, but I noticed there's that brand of meeting on my calendar.
Yeah, I love that, Shom. It's sort of we've got to move something forward, and if we don't block out our calendars, it's gonna get run over by the 500 other things we're doing. I like that. I think when I've been reading about meetings, those sorts of meetings, I think what I've read is when the group who's meeting agrees that that's the best way to move forward. Like I have meetings on my calendar where we know we are not going to touch the topic again until we get back together. So we actually build in that time for us to actually work together, but we need to be in the same space. It's not something I could do on my own or somebody else could do on my own. So I think those sorts of meetings, and show them if those meetings on your calendar are ones that's how the group works best, to sort of swap things back and forth, that may be informational, but if that's the group is agreed is the best way to communicate, that's fantastic. I always tell my chiefs we have a meeting on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock, sorry, 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock your guys' time though. Maybe I did time zone math there accidentally. At 2 o'clock, if it can wait from then rather than being 16 emails, let's just talk about it then. So sometimes they'll give an information piece that could have been an email, but we've sort of agreed as a group. It's just easier for us all to hear it in that same space at the same time. I love it. Good. Okay, I think the other thing that I can think of, and I'm sure there's other reasons, is sometimes it's good to bring the group together for some sort of team building. So maybe the material could have been covered in a different way. Like I think about things that we do all the time in residency, right? Do you need to have a presentation on diabetes well, for the, the auditory learners, maybe that's great to have the expert there to ask questions. That's great, that sort of thing. But probably that content, and we know that more now, probably than any other time in education, that content could be delivered 16 different other ways that don't require residents and students to be in a room. But I think actually the big thing that we lost in COVID, at least in my residency, when we took out meetings or didactic sessions, call them what you want, was we lost some of the community and the team building, and having people back together has made a big difference. So maybe you have the meeting because it's important for people to see each other and to interact. And it could have been an email, but you're building team. All right, I'm going to move on unless you guys can think of any other big buckets that we've missed in terms of thinking about a meeting. Okay. All right. So then, the next thing is who should be there. They've done sort of like pseudoscience, kind of like most of palliative medicine. Did I say that out loud? My palliative medicine colleagues won't like that, right? But like, well, we put a fan on the face of like 3 patients and they felt better after that. So we think you can like treat dyspnea with a fan. We're like, yeah, that's good. That's good. This is sort of in that category. I think most experts would say that if the group is going to interact with each other, 7 or less is probably the right number. So Sean, look at this. You guys have done a great job. You have, approximately 7 people in these meetings. So it works. It sounds like the folks, when they're thinking about these, are usually like 60-minute time meetings where that's about the amount of time and people if everybody's going to interact, for everybody to have a chance to be sort of heard. One of my pet peeves about who should attend is the standing meeting, which is fine, but then there ends up being like a topic that the meeting is going to be consumed with that half of the people in that meeting don't actually need to be at. And I wish somebody would sometimes tell me in advance, you know what, listen, we're going to talk about the budget for the parking lot repavement. We don't need you, Mo, at that meeting unless you want to be there, right? So like this permission to sort of move people in and out of a meeting, if it's a standing meeting in particular, and to be thoughtful about who you bring in. Brainstorming meetings, you guys. Talk with me a little bit about, you're having a brainstorming meeting, or maybe like Ermias was saying, there's like a discussion about something that there isn't quite agreement on. Talk with me about who maybe should be at that meeting and who maybe should not be at that meeting. Ermias, maybe I'll call on you. Because you sort of had a meeting that was maybe kind of in this category.
Yeah, I think all people who will be somehow involved with some kind of activity that is planned for the discussion should be there. And somebody who is going to lead that kind of job should be there. So that in this kind of meeting, my expectation is at the end, all the team members will have reached at a consensus. So
yeah, so sometimes like the boss people at those meetings is sort of like a less than helpful idea, right? So let's say, again, all I know, you guys are the residents, but we have a house staff meeting every month, and the bosses are there for the first part of the meeting, maybe the first 15 minutes, just to see if they have anything that they need us for, and then we leave, right? And then they have a discussion among themselves about how are the caps going at this, that, or other place? Is the food decent at this other place, right? And that sort of like discussion probably happens better without me there, or Tanya, my program administrator, who's actually paying for the lunches, right? So like when we have palliative medicine team meetings and we're like strategizing, like we don't involve the boss there sometimes, because sometimes the bosses say there isn't money for that, or that breaks a rule, and it like stifles conversation and that sort of thing. So you have to get it to the boss eventually, but maybe they're not the right one for that meeting. And maybe they are. Maybe, there's been a discussion and now we need to involve the other people. So being thoughtful about who your people are. I will say that who should attend, I have more than once really accidentally offended somebody by not inviting them to a meeting. And so I I pause for just a moment to say that if you're scheduling a meeting, sometimes thinking about who you are not inviting is important for maybe the fact that you reach out to them and say, there's a reason you're not there, or I was thinking of not. Is that okay? And sometimes for me, that's I'm worried the meeting is getting too big, and I'd like to have this, or I think we'd like to think through this idea and have it more fleshed out before we bring it to you. So that's why we're not inviting, so that people don't think, we don't like cloak and daggers, meetings behind things, or feelings getting hurt. So we with there? All right. Questions, other thoughts about who should attend? No. Okay.
I was just going to remark on that phenomenon of having a leader in a brainstorming meeting, because it can be problematic, because anytime the leader says something, you think it's like they're giving you direction. And you're like, you want to listen to what they have to say more than what anyone else has to say. But in your experience, Mo, is setting the stage helpful in that? Like, are you able to overcome that psychology if you say that there's no bad ideas, we're just sharing ideas? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think I love that idea, Shom. I think um, I think it'll speak a little bit to one of the things that we'll talk about in a moment, which is pre-meetings with people. And actually, maybe that's next. Nope, link with meeting, pre-meetings. So I have had Mike Krug, who's one of the most fantastic human beings I've ever worked with. He's one of my associate program directors. He has come to me and he has said, Mo, at the core faculty meeting that you attend all the time, we have on the agenda next week that we're going to talk about X. I would like to remind you that it's a good idea for you to speak last. Please wait for everybody else to give their opinion before you do it. And Shom, he's trying to keep me from doing exactly what you said, which is as soon as I say, yes, we should do X, then everybody's like, okay, well, now we won't tell her why that's a bad idea, right? And I think it's especially important when it's a group of people that you don't work with enough that they know that they can override what the leader is saying, to do that. Did you have other thoughts, Shom, about how you do that, other than sort of a pre-meeting with the leader to kind of keep them quiet, or to? Oh, I bet you did, but I'm going to let you tell me what you were going to think.
No, I was curious about your strategies. I mean, it's something that's come up. Leaders have great ideas, but I feel like there's something about that dynamic that makes it hard to brainstorm alongside the senior leaders.
Yeah, I think
sorry,
Amy, go. Yeah.
I've been to some effective meetings where everyone's given like a yellow sticky note to write, like say that it's a topic, right? Like this, that, or the other, and you just write your ideas on a sticky note. It's anonymous, and then you put the topics up on a wall, 1, 2, 3, stick your sticky notes there. Then all the sticky notes are there and you don't know who said it. I actually like, it's really helpful to make everybody anonymous and let the quiet people speak up. Everybody's squares look the same. And then you go through that topic one by one. Well, here's these 7 ideas for this. And then anyway, I have found it really effective to get the quiet folks talking.
I love it, Amy. I think it's called the whiteboard. It's got like a term for it.
I'm old like you. We didn't actually have those at the time. So.
Yeah. Love it. Good. Other thoughts, you guys? I think the other thing is when you're setting up the meeting rules at the get-go, it's like everybody's opinion here is the same, and leader X, we're happy to hear your opinion, but we're all going to brainstorm on a level field. Again, you have to sort of know your leader and be okay, but something in the ground rules should work. Okay. Amy, when we get back to where we should be, bring up this idea of sticky notes again, because it's different if you don't have an actual whiteboard to stick things on. All right, length of meeting. Who's fond of the 20-minute or the 50-minute meeting as opposed to the 30-minute or the 60-minute meeting? Julia is. Why do you like the 10-minute truncated, Julia?
I think it probably stemmed from the experience of back-to-back pandemic meetings. And there was, it was a terrible, terrible experience to just have to shift gears so quickly from one planning session to, okay, now I'm going to meet with my clinic manager, and I have to get into a totally different frame of mind to be able to do that. And also to take care of yourself. Like, you can't just sit in a constant meeting.
Right, right. You have
Yeah,
to please insert the Foley catheter and remove it at
physical,
the end of the day.
yeah,
Right.
physical body needs attention. So you have to, having some understanding of building in breaks is important.
Great. Mistakes I've made, assuming everybody knows the meeting is 50 minutes, when the calendar invite was 60. The time management in a meeting where everybody is not on the same page of how long it's going to be has caught me off guard many, many, many times. So again, sort of being clear from the get-go when you go. How about longer than an hour meetings, you guys?
Sorry, I have really strong feelings about that too, because I 2 hour meetings are very long. The attention to be able to focus in a meeting that long is very difficult. Sometimes it can be helpful if there are multiple topics and it's a group of people who just work productively together in filtering through topics, but I have found that to be the rare bird.
Yeah, I think my faculty say if it's going to be over an hour, you better call it a retreat, Mo. You better feed us, and we better be outdoors. I think there are some topics and concepts and tasks that need to get done where it takes a little bit longer, but I think be thoughtful. How about the 30-minute or the 20-minute meeting? Have you guys had luck with those?
I mean, I think it really depends on what the topic is, because I think I've definitely had meetings that are, 30 minutes, and then you're really starting to get into the discussion, and it's, oh, time's up, need to be done now. And then you kind of just have to schedule the other meeting where you're going to invariably have some time cut off on either side. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's obviously a one size fits all. I think it's just trying to do the pre-work, as you say.
Like it. Armias, where you look like you unmiked, were you going to say something different?
Yeah, well, it was similar. If the pre-work is done very well, then the meeting time can be short. And then also the less number of participants, meeting can be shorter. But if there are a larger number of participants, everybody may want to say something, and that takes time, so it takes longer. But the longer the meeting is, then participants may lose their attention and they don't get focused. That's as a problem.
I love it. I love it. One of my bosses makes 30-minute meetings because she believes that it forces us to do the pre-work before we get there, and we don't actually waste the other 30 minutes. There are no introductions because we have to know each other before those quick meetings start. There's no, it's like, here's the topic, go. So they're a little bit like, they're not relaxing, I guess is what I would say, but can be done in a pinch. And you guys have said all the things, right? Just pick the size or the length appropriately. All right. Time of day, very briefly. Most people are morning people statistically in terms of working effectiveness sort of things. I am not one of those people. But if you have a regularly meeting group and there's actually a time of day where they do better work, it's reasonable to think about the time of the day. We all have had postprandial meetings and know sort of how those go as well. So be thoughtful about time of the day, and some of it is just, when can people meet? But if you have serious work to do, time of the day may matter. All right. Location, you guys, like we're virtual today. There's no way that I was going to fly to Seattle to like be anywhere, even in a city close to you guys. So that was sort of impractical. So there's impractical reasons to sometimes not be in person. But other thoughts about in person, location? It's a very ambiguous question. I guess I'll say, go ahead, Luke.
I was
Thanks.
just gonna
Save
say
me.
that, obviously Zoom is something that is so much more prevalent now, and I think that it's so easy and lends itself to getting like a group like this together. But I think that for I at least in my residency training, I felt like there were a lot of meetings that would have been so much more effective in person. So I think, kind of going back to that initial question of who should be at the meeting and what's the meeting about. Um, I I do just feel that there is clearly a role for in person and doing even at like the place of work to kind of have the focus, but also camaraderie.
Love it. Amy, going back to your idea that you've seen work, in terms of, sharing secret ballots on paper, whiteboards, sort of visual learners, that sort of thing. Have you seen any of those concepts done well
Yeah, I mean,
on virtual?
even here we do the polls where the words pop up there. That works really well, and it's anonymous and can allow everybody to speak up. I mean, I think Zoom has added those, not Zoom, but the world has added those features that make it easy for everybody to speak up, and then it's there in front of you. The difference in the whiteboard is you have to walk up with a pen. It's not anonymous. Unless, it's not anonymous is all. So.
Yeah, so you're saying maybe if anonymity is a good idea, the virtual space is actually even easier. Yeah, okay, good. Any other yeah, I think we'll just keep moving. All right, we mentioned this earlier in sort of pre-work groups again. Sometimes, depending upon the topic and the purpose of the meeting, right, doing some one-on-one conversations beforehand is astronomically important. So you guys have alluded to this both for time reasons and actually getting the topic done. I lead a meeting, the State Board of Education, graduate medical education meeting here in Idaho. And I would say for our hour meeting quarterly, I probably do 6 hours of one-on-one discussions with program directors throughout the state, hospital administrators across the state, people in the State Board of Education, just to make sure that one, as the moderator of that, I'm not caught off guard by different ideas, and so that we can actually come up with an agenda to curate what we need to talk about into that hour while we're all together. So we don't necessarily come to a consensus before the meeting, but at least we know where we're all sort of coming from and nobody's caught off guard to begin with. So super important to have those meetings ahead of time. Some of them are about content. Some of them are about behaviors, right? Like I was saying, Mike Krug came to me, my associate program director, and said, you behave at this meeting. This is how I want you to behave. This is what I need from you specifically, and those sorts of things. All right. Are there materials that should be sent ahead of time? We've all been to meetings where we don't know what's going on, or the thing that you need to read in advance or know about in advance is sent 10 minutes before, right? I have led those meetings. I have sent those documents 10 minutes in advance. Daniela can tell you that the slides that I have were sent to her, I think, 20 minutes in advance, these sorts of things. So be thoughtful about to use your time well. I think when Armias was saying, right, those meetings where maybe there's a smaller number of people, you're going to have a very short meeting, but it's important that everybody's on the same page to begin with, right? We're going to review a policy. We're going to edit, and make some changes, right? Like make sure everybody's got it ahead of time. These are things you guys know, but until you screw it up a couple of times, as the leader of the meeting, sometimes it doesn't drive itself home. All right. We're going to talk about agenda next. So one of the greatest gifts I had from one of the senior graduate medical education leaders in Idaho, Ted Epperly, was, I think, the ability to look at the agenda that he set to me for meetings that I was attending that he was running. Ted got this from somebody else. And again, like I said, I don't know if there's research about exactly how it would, but this is what Ted sends when he sends us a MIA meeting, right? The meeting is clearly labeled. There is a purpose, right? So if the purpose of the meeting is team building, that's what it says in the thing. If the purpose is to decide whether we're going to expand the residency from 12 residents to 13 residents, it's right there. It's up in the front. So you sort of have, and it helps when I get his agendas to sort of set my tone for what I need to do before I get there, even before I look at the rest of the agenda and the attached materials, right? If it says team building, I'm like, oh, I can kind of just show up and I'm going to be okay, right? If it looks like there's a decision that has to be made that I feel very strongly about, like I got to get my stuff in line before then. Date, time, location, attachments. Ted always lists the attachments in the body of the agenda. So if there's like 3 attachments, it says attachment 1, here's what it is. Attachment 2, here's what it is. Because sometimes, right, things are sort of hard or they're labeled funny. And that way you've got it right there and you're like, oh, there's 3 attachments I've got to look at, right? Or maybe I only need to look at one of them, but I know the other ones are there. And then he very clearly sets a time for every part of the meeting. So if the introduction is going to take 5 minutes, that's what it says. And it says, here's the time, start and stop, here's the topic, introductions, and then he puts who's responsible. So if he's going to do the introductions, it's there. If I have the next topic, my name's there. So when we don't have to play any herky-jerky in the meeting, it's like, next person's up, go, right? He also adds in this other column that I've not really done terribly good justice here, but it's like a column that lets you know if you're going to have to vote on something, if it's a brainstorming, if it's a discussion, if it's really sort of an informational thing that can't be shared very well email wise, if it's a time for questions. So it's really clear about like what mode we're supposed to be in at that point. I have led way too many meetings, you guys, where people thought we were going to make a decision at the end of the meeting that they were making. Usually the they are the residents, right? When in fact, it was just a brainstorming session and the decision about what was actually going to happen was going to be made later, and this was to generate ideas. And I think this column of an agenda can help to be very clear about that. We are going to brainstorm today, or we are making a decision today. I think it helps frame. People speak up more when it's brainstorming, and you set the expectations sort of appropriately. Great. And then at the bottom of all of Ted's agendas, it tells us the next time we're meeting to remind us what we're doing. Any other thoughts about things you guys have seen for like physical agendas that you've found to be helpful? Okay.
I think just having one is go to a number of meetings without clear agendas, many of which I'm responsible for, like wanting to meet with people and kind of make it up at the last moment. So yeah, I appreciate kind of this level of detail around how to do it well.
Yeah. Thanks, Shom. And I think, if you're meeting with one-on-one with somebody, like maybe you don't need an agenda. Maybe that's more like a patient visit where, you set the agenda verbally when you get there. Here's the things I thought we were going to talk about. Is there anything else to add? Right. Our ambulatory care folks are really good at that. I'm just like, oh, I'll come back and see you again this afternoon because I'm a hospitalist. You're still here. Thank goodness, because I didn't know what to say this morning. I had to go look up 13 things. All right. Okay, now we're in the meeting itself. Thank goodness. There's so much pre-work. But I think this is the case, you guys, to run a really good meeting. Oftentimes, it's so much pre-work before you actually get to the meeting itself. All right. Technology needs to work. The room needs to be set up properly, right? I get to meetings sometimes and we want to be in like a circle or a square so we can see each other and the tables are in a different arrangement, right? Like get there in time to sort of like make the place look the way you want it to be. Think about the arrangement of the room, right? Are you going to use a whiteboard, right? Is Zoom what you need? And you need to learn how to do this new thing that Amy just told me isn't new, but I think is new because I didn't know you could do like a word cloud on Zoom. And maybe you have to like put some other piece of software in. I don't know, right? But if I'm going to do that, I better figure that out before I get there. Daniela was kind. She said, Mo, I'm going to get on 15 minutes early. If you want to get on then, we can double check things. We made sure that my share screen worked. These are all things you guys know, but especially when they're high stakes meetings, sort of giving yourself in your calendar that time to get there and make sure things are working. All right, start on time. Shum does a really good job in these sessions to make sure that we always start on time. As soon as you don't start on time, if it's a recurring meeting, pretty soon you've lost 10 minutes, because if you don't start on time, nobody's going to show up on time for the next one. If you start up on time and people are late, well, they've already missed the first part, like tough noogies. We can talk about what to do with latecomers here in a moment. But starting on time, ending on time, and then that pre-introduction stuff that you do to sort of reframe for people, even if it's in the agenda, what the purpose of the meeting is, to verbally sort of make sure everybody's on track about what the purpose of the meeting is. All right. Laying out clear rules of conduct, especially if it's a new group of people that hasn't met before, and the group's rules are going to change. I just put a bunch of them up on the slide of things that might work. Things, what I find is if it's a regularly meeting group, we often will add rules as we go, because we're like, we didn't know that Dr. So-and-so was going to talk 80% of the time. Now we need a new rule. That's the step forward, step back sort of rule. But you can sort of adjust these as you go. My favorite one with the residents, and with all due respect to those of you who are recently residents, I love them dearly, but I love them dearly. We're just going to go with that, right? I'm like, this is a meeting where state the problem, but let's come up with a solution, right? Like, we're not going to spend house staff meeting whining, right? State the problem, let's solve it, let's move on, right? So sort of bringing solutions, not complaints, is one of my favorite ones. All right. The timeout. We need a little bit of a moment for the timeout. You could call it something different. Timeout makes it sound like you're going to send somebody to like the virtual corner or to the actual corner of the room. But this is, and let me get the names right, for Frisch and Green in this book, the Harvard Business Review Guide to Making Every Meeting Matter. They have a chapter in here where they talk about jellyfish. Jellyfish is the code word that they use in their meetings for when somebody is taking the meeting off topic. And they state in their rules of conduct at the beginning of the meeting, and I've not actually been to a meeting with them, so this is just how I envision it works when I've like read about it, is we would say, okay, guys, this is the purpose for the meeting today. If we get off topic, we're going to give each other permission that somebody else could say jellyfish. That means we're getting off topic, and we're gonna close down that line, and we're going to move back to the purpose of the meeting. Has anybody ever seen anybody do something like this? No, I've not either. I have given students and residents the code word pineapple if we're in a family meeting and things are really going out of control. Pineapple is the save me, Mo, I'm out of control. Can you please help? I've tried it there. I've used it there. I've not used jellyfish in a meeting, but something to sort of think about, especially if you have a recurring meeting where there's somebody that you might need to manage who tends to take over your meeting and make your meeting their meeting. You might want to try to put something like this in. I'd be interested to see if anybody does it. Let me know how it goes.
Well, that's where the time slots come in. Like if you have an agenda with time slots, you have someone who's like the police, then you'd be like, there you go. That's when the timeline helps.
Yeah, love it. Great. Luke?
Yeah, I'm just curious this what I think that we've all had meetings that people take over, and what strategies you would recommend of kind of how to approach that, or just thinking again of like, oh, we have a residency meeting and like a particular resident is kind of commanding the meeting, and how it seems like the person that's kind of running the meeting or whoever's in quote unquote charge needs to be the person that like says something. I'm curious what your thoughts are of strategies to rein in a meeting in a way that doesn't offend anybody.
Yeah. So thanks, Luke. I think one thing is you might offend, but some preemptive setting the rules at the beginning of the meeting that somebody may interrupt. Like if I was doing, I may interrupt you and get us back on task if you know we've gone off topic, or I want to make sure that we hear from as many people as we can. So if you're taking more than your time and there's some people we haven't heard from yet, I may interrupt you. So sort of like setting that. I'm going to riff off what I think Amy might have been alluding to or stating as best I could hear, but you might say at the beginning, you know, Amy, if we get off task, will you please get the group back on task? Right. So Luke, I think, you know, if you're leading a meeting or you've noticed that a leader of a meeting that's a recurring meeting is not doing a good job reining people in, again, you know, you might have to be a little bit sensitive, but leaders should be open to feedback. And so, you know, going to that leader and saying, you know, geez, I'm wondering, you know, I'd like to help. We seem like we get a little bit off task. Would you like to delegate that task to me during the meeting? I could try to get us, but it has to be sort of announced ahead of time. And I will say most of the time when I realize that I need this, I haven't set the rules. And so sort of having a set of rules that you use at every meeting, you know, where there's a chance this might happen, right? So that you don't ever need them. Is probably the best way to do it. Some of the meeting rooms pre-COVID that I was in here at the Boise V actually had some of these rules like up on the wall. And they would just be like, you know, remember, these are our rules for this meeting. And then it didn't take any other time. So those sorts of things might help. The other thing, Luke, is that if you know who that person's going to be, who's going to take all the time or derail the conversation, if you can give them a task, sometimes they can't multitask. So I often have the person I'm worried is going to overtake the conversation be the person who takes the notes for the meeting. Because sometimes they it derails them enough that it slows them down. Yep.
Not why you always have me take notes. No.
I was gonna say that's why they used to hand me
Yeah.
the marker and they'd be like, "Well, you just as your colleague presents, would you like to put it up on the board?" Just because I didn't interrupt them as much. Anyway, any other strategies for the derailer for Luke's question, you guys? All right. Okay. All right, I think some of these things we've covered. So we didn't talk about an introductory activity or introductions. I think people do this differently depending upon the type of meeting. Has anybody seen a really good introduction? I personally, I cry at a hat, and and you know, I hold the hands of my patients while they're dying, and I'm sort of like an emotional person, but like the ones where personally where somebody asks me what my favorite movie is, I want to like die inside because I'm like, it's not pertinent and I don't really care. So maybe that's what you prefer to do. That's great. But has anybody heard like a really good opening introduction thing that doesn't like make me want to vomit by sharing my favorite movie, but still is touchy-feely enough for the folks who do want to know what my favorite movie is?
One form of introduction I encountered during a meeting was all the participants were asked to stand in an open area and to assume that area as the world, and we were asked to stand on a geographic area from where we came from. And it was a meeting with participants from different countries, different parts of the world, and so on. So it was interesting.
Wow, that would take skill. I'd be like, which is up, which is, yeah, I like it. Good. Any other good introductory things folks have seen? Yeah, I think the ones that I sort of like best are the ones that are pertinent to the meeting topic, right? Is there something that you want to make sure that we cover today that you didn't see on the agenda? Or is there, something new that you know, if it's a meeting of teachers, right? Could you share a teaching win you know, in the last couple of weeks, something to maybe like inspire the group a little bit. Sometimes folks will start with, you know, gratitude sort of statements, right? You know, introduce yourself and mention an act of kindness that you've seen somebody do recently. Sort of it depends upon like the frame of mind that you maybe want to get people's minds into. I think the one we're going to use for our program evaluation committee, it's actually a retreat because it's a half day. But I think what we're going to use at the beginning when people introduce themselves is they're if they could only share one piece of medical information after the apocalypse that they would want human race to know about, what medical post-apocalyptic sentence would they leave them with, and just sort of see where people go. Anyway, so I think if the introductory ties to the concept or of the meeting, it seems to fit better. All right, consider a note taker. That's for two reasons. One, if you've got the person who speaks a lot, like I mentioned when Luke was asking about the derailer, you know, you can give that person a job that keeps them busy. Two, if you're taking notes and leading the meeting, it's often hard to do. So having somebody else who can sort of help with that is a blessing. Time management. I like to have a timekeeper that's separate from me. Again, it allows me to sort of like be present with the ideas that are happening and to try to stay on top of time, but to have somebody who can hold me accountable if I'm leading the meeting to make sure that we do stay on time. And again, it gets other people involved. Maybe that's the quiet person who doesn't like to share things, but maybe, you know, it helps them sort of get a little bit involved, even if they're just saying, we need to move on to the next topic. That may get the juices flowing. All right, other things about meetings in general, the more as the leader of the meeting or the leader of the group that you can give recognition to other people, the better. It's got to be genuine. It can't be sort of like fluffed up and otherwise. But if you worked on you know, if somebody else in the group worked on the project, make sure to say their name, give them credit. If you can in the agenda and it's appropriate for somebody else to be speaking about things, to get people involved, to bring the team together and not have them just listen to the leader speaking all the time. I cannot tell you the number of times that people have come up to me after meetings and said, thank you so much. I didn't do that much, but thank you for mentioning that I participated in that. It goes a long ways. All right, orchestrating group discussion. So some of this, Luke, is the derailer, right? You got to have, hopefully, as a leader of the meeting, you got to be able to get the derailer back on track with the various strategies that we've talked about. Ideas for the person who hasn't spoken up at all. What are you going to do to help get the ideas out? Amy had one, right? Do something anonymous where the quiet person idea might be able to get to the group without the quiet person actually having to fess up to the great idea. Other ideas?
Go around and ask each participant to give opinion.
Yeah, everybody speaks. Make sure everybody talks. Great. And I'm looking at the time, not having designated a timekeeper here, although Shom was probably getting ready to tell me it was 5 minutes. The other thing I can think of, you guys, is in your right at the very beginning of the meeting saying, I want to make sure to hear from everyone. I may call on folks if they haven't participated yet, just to make sure that we hear your voice, right? And people can pass if they're not interested, but I might do that. So telling people you're going to call on them makes it easier than you just sort of like, you know, Julia, what do you think now? Right? You know, like, right. She'd be like, oh yeah, Mo was going to do that. So we're good. All right. I'm going to keep us moving. At the end of the meeting, of course, ending with a summary and being clear about action items. So as your agenda has who's going to be speaking or leading various sections of things, your sort of summary of the meeting, it should be clear who has what task, right? Just like when you round, like who's going to call the consultant. We don't need to like meet again to decide who's going to call the consultant. We're going to decide at the time at the end of the meeting, right? And making sure that we've got clear timelines on deliverables, when we're meeting next, those sorts of things. All right. And then if this is a group you're going to continually meet with, especially if this is something that you're working on, asking people for feedback, just like we would if we led a family meeting, if we were, you know, giving a didactic presentation, those sorts of things. All right, and then post-meeting work. the people who write about doing effective meetings say the summary of the meeting should be sent within hours of completion of the meeting. I dream of that sort of efficiency, but that seems to work best in expert opinion sort of things. And then people need to follow through on action items, right? Shom is really good. I can't remember when he asked me to do this talk, like a year ago or something like that. He's really good at making sure that there's an email that I get that sort of reminds me in a reasonable amount of time that I'm doing the talk. Daniela like sends me things to sort of say like, here's a milepost that you need to hit for this sort of thing. So having an effective way, and maybe that's somebody that you partner with who has different administrative skills than you do, to sort of make sure that we're hitting the milestones to get things through for action items. Thank you guys for participating.